Hello everyone, and welcome to a bit of a special video for this channel. It's not often I talk about the vanilla Fire Emblem games, and on top of that, this video isn't an LTC, but an opinion piece, and so I wanted to start with a disclaimer that another HackROM YouTuber would often use. Disclaimer: my opinion may be bad. But as for what inspired this video, one day I was pretty bored prowling around a Discord server the other day, as you do, and on a wild hair I decided to check out the channel on the GBA games. Now, normally I stay away from discussion on the vanilla games because discussion around them tends to get really frustrating for me. People on the internet love to stubbornly hold on to opinions about these games that they haven't touched in 5 years, and on this day, the most frustrating topic of all happened to rear its ugly head: unit debates. A user on the server made the claim that Oswin, the early game armor knight in FE7, was C tier. His early contributions are overrated and he falls off relatively quickly. I found this to be a pretty ridiculous claim. I think anyone who's gotten to chapter 12 of that game knows Oswin is a serious asset to your team, and so I spoke up. Oswin can't possibly be C tier, I said, because Oswin is just as good as Lowen. Now, two questions naturally arise about my counterclaim here. One, do I actually believe in my statement, or am I just making an equally ridiculous counterclaim to troll them? I was pretty bored after all, but, well, kind of. I don't think they're the exact same. I think Lowen's a little bit better than Oswin, but the gap's pretty small. But second, and more importantly, why bring up Lowen at all? After all, hypothetically speaking, I have no idea what this stranger thinks of Lowen. Except, I've been in the Fire Emblem fanbase long enough to know exactly what someone who spends way too much time arguing about tier lists thinks of Lowen. In fact, I even have a name for my least favorite type of FE fan: the casual elitist. Fellow LTCer Jumpy23 has a similar concept of this type of player in the Beta Sprayer. I prefer using the term casual elitist to describe this type of player because you don't need to know about rock climbing to understand the term casual elitist. You just need to break down casual and elitist into their core components. An elitist is someone who thinks of themselves as an expert of the game, and in a Fire Emblem context, they look down on people who aren't as knowledgeable in the type of playstyle they consider the best. This is usually an LTC playstyle. It can be different playstyles depending on the specific game they're being elitist about, but in this case, it was an LTC playstyle. As someone who does LTC and talks to a lot of other people who LTC or do challenge runs, I can tell you that this behavior actually gets less common the more practice an LTCer is. Typically, someone who actually goes through the work of committing weeks and weeks to planning and executing an LTC realizes that what they're doing is so niche and unreflective of what the average FE playthrough looks like that their perspective shifts entirely. They're much more likely to talk about the one cool thing they found a mid-tier unit could do in their run, rather than just reiterate how much Marcus outclasses every unit in the game. The users who like to do that usually don't actually commit to doing challenge runs themselves, bringing us to the other half of the term, casual. The casual in Casual Elitist refers to the fact that, despite their love of arguing on the internet about Fire Emblem games, they usually don't play these games all that often. The worst offenders of casual elitism are players that have never touched the games in question and instead get all their opinions from like 2-year-old mecha videos or whatever. This is what makes Lowen such a good call-out character for these players, in my opinion. LTCers rate the guy highly because they've played the game so much that they know exactly which points in the game they tried Sane or Florina for this or that task and found that they fell short compared to Lowen. But if you haven't tested that stuff yourself because you haven't played the game, then it's very hard to explain why a 7-move unit with mediocre combat actually is better than, say, Oswin, you know? The main thing that really keeps casual elitists from understanding the value of Lowen is that when you haven't played FE7 in a long time, you tend to assume that it's pretty much FE8. They're both GBA games that are easier than most series entries. The most useful item in both games is probably the Javelin, and the best unit in each game is the Paladin Jagan. But here's the thing. FE7 isn't FE8, and Marcus isn't Seth. Let's break those statements down, starting with the second one. Marcus is the best unit in FE7, but he's not nearly as good as Seth, arguably the best unit in the whole series. Compared to Seth, Marcus is slower and frailer, he doesn't gain levels as fast, and his level ups tend to be worse. Let me give you an example of what that looks like in practice. An enemy in Sacred Stones needs 9 attack speed to avoid being doubled by Seth. In the first 9 chapters you have Seth, from Prologue to Route Split, I counted 11 units that he doesn't double, including bosses and Joshua. In FE7, an enemy needs 8 attack speed to avoid getting doubled by base Marcus. In Chapter 13X alone, 8 units have at least that much speed. That does include the boss and the reinforcements, but it does not include the brigands, who usually have 7 speed but can roll high, or the nomads, who usually do have 8 speed but can roll low. Marcus, in general, struggles a lot more to stay on top of enemy types with more middling speed stats, like nomads, cavaliers, and brigands, really common enemy types, especially early on when Marcus is at his most dominant. So, although Marcus is still your best unit at handling these guys quickly and efficiently, he really appreciates a unit that can kind of hang back and not draw too much attention on enemy phase, but then zip up to the front line on player phase to deal the last 7 or 8 damage to an enemy in Marcus's way. Enter Lowen. His combat stats don't need to be good, because he's not really meant to take on full HP enemies. He can kill enemies that Marcus has weakened, he can protect Priscilla or some other healer while they patch Marcus up, readjust Marcus's inventory as the map goes on. In Eliwood 11, Marcus introduces Lowen as his main man, and I'll be damned if he doesn't play exactly like that. Like, he's just got such a nice level of versatility to him that really lets him play around his stat deficiencies, as long as you're familiar enough with his game plan to use him well. My other statement, that FE7 is not FE8, is referring to map design. FE7 maps are a lot less friendly to soloing than FE8s are. FE8, in my view, just distills down into a Seth solo the more the player tries to optimize it. This is true at all levels of play, whether you're trying to optimize boss kill EXP or just trying to make it through Phantom Ship. The most quick and consistent way to get through Sacred Stones maps is to rely on Seth as much as humanly possible. In FE7, not only is Marcus less capable of soloing maps without support, but the maps themselves are also more willing to punish the player for trying this approach. Take a look at this image. You might have seen it before. This is Hector Mode's Chapter 15, Talons of Light. It's often memed on as one of the most easy to trivialize maps in the game, if not the whole series, and you can see it's pretty easy to beat this map by just sitting an unequipped Hector on the throne there. And I could talk about how this map is an exception because defend is an exploitable objective and throne healing is stupid and a bunch of other stuff you already know, but what I actually want to talk about is how this map is similar to the other maps in FE7. Namely, in that players that go for these cheesy map clears usually end up missing a lot of stuff. In this image, the player in question is going to be missing a Silver Axe, a Men's Staff, a Draco Shield, all the experience these enemies give, and a level up on Merlinus. This wide breadth of side objectives that you need to split up to get all of is a pretty consistent feature of FE7, thanks in no small part to the last guy I mentioned, Merlinus. Merlinus is often memed on as kind of a fake side objective, not just by casual elitists, but also by the game itself if you guard him with Marcus. However, protecting him is actually something you do need to consider in a lot of maps. There's usually a chunk of enemies on a given map that you aren't going to naturally kill on your way to the main objective, or if there aren't any enemies like that at the start of the map, there are usually reinforcements that are very difficult to outrun that can really threaten him. And as evidence of that, I'd like to bring out someone who loves to outrun reinforcements, Don151. In his 0% LTC run of Hector Hard Mode, Don had to give some consideration as to how to protect unpromoted Merlinus in all of these maps. Wow, that's a lot. And keep in mind, this is an LTC, so if you're even a little bit slower than this Don guy, you can probably add a good 3 or 4 maps to that list. In fact, the map I most associate with the guarding of the tent isn't any of these, but is Chapter 17, Whereabouts Unknown. It's got that long stretch of grass in front of the castle, so you can see those horses coming in from a mile away when they spawn in on turn 7. Hector's well on his way to the throne, so he can't be the one to take them on, and the nomads are scary enough that a unit like Dorcas or Elliewood isn't really going to cut it. Enter Oswin. He's still your second best combat unit this far into the game, so it's not hard to find a slot for him, but he usually struggles to help with the main objective of the map past the first turn or two if you're relying on Marcus to carry the brunt of your offense. No. What Oswin excels in is preventing your offense from collapsing in on itself. This can come in the form of protecting Merlinus so you don't have to discard your enemy drops, but it can also come in the form of protecting the rest of your squishies from enemies that can flank Marcus to hunt them down. Hector Hard Mode is pretty infamous for its spamming of Pegasus Knights in the early game, and while they have a reputation for being slow and wimpy, they really don't seem like it when they're bearing down on Urk or Matthew. Now, this is normally where Oswin faces the allegations of being replaceable. After all, killing Pegasi and protecting a tent really don't seem like impressive accomplishments. Why not just use a unit with 5 move and better long-term potential? And it depends on the map, of course, but usually the enemy has some pressure point, some angle of attack that's both in Marcus's blind spot and is demanding enough that you want a unit that can shrug off like 3 or 4 enemy attacks at once. The only one who can even dream about filling Oswin's role in that position is Hector, but he has some pretty clear problems. Not only is he unavailable for this kind of side objective during siege maps, but he's also just way worse at base. 19 HP, 8 defense, 4 skill. It's gonna take him a good 9 or 10 levels to get as bulky as Oswin, let alone trying to close that accuracy gap. And who are you using in the meantime? Raven? Dorcas? No. Oswin's bulk lead is very real and very noticeable. He does fall off eventually. I normally drop him around Dragon's Gate, but that still means Oswin's got a good 10 to 12 maps of solid contributions, which puts him in the same ballpark as guys like Pent and Harkin, to give you some perspective. Lowen is on firmer ground than our armored friend, but he too starts to feel the heat in Kinship's Bond. That's where you're getting Isadora, Heath, Wrath, and a second Nightcrest so you can promote Kent or Sane if you've trained them. Lowen's usually going to have better defenses than all these options, so I can see someone bringing him further into the mid-game, but he's really got to fight tooth and nail for that deployment because Hector Hard Mode does not have a lot of slots to go around. But if you retire him after Kinship's Bond, like I normally do, that puts him at a good 14 maps of contributions. Oh yeah, Kent and Sane. Quick aside about the Kaylin calves, just because I know it's going to be brought up, but obviously if you train them in Lin mode, they kind of shift the whole thing. They do what Lowen does much better, but they probably can't replicate what Oswin does. I'm not too sure. about that second part just because I pretty much always skip Lin mode, and if you do that, Sent and Kane join way underleveled. An average Lowen is going to be tying or beating them in everything, and even if you wanted to train these two in Hector mode, I'd still recommend waiting until the second crest. Giving Lowen the first crest really just capitalizes on something he's already good at doing, and the Lin mode calves really appreciate the extra time with unpromoted EXP gain much more than Lowen would because of their higher growths. But with that aside, we can see that these aspects of FE7 that separate it from its contemporaries also highlight what makes its early supporting cast so damn cool. I think these two units are really good and really well designed, and they've given me a deeper appreciation for FE7's design ideas as a whole. When arguing about Fire Emblem games, especially ones where reclassing isn't an option, it's very easy to just flatten these units down to their base class, but I hope I've demonstrated that there's a lot more going on with these two units than what looking at their movement stats would tell you. But on that note, let me know if you disagree. Maybe you think that I overlooked how well these two transition into the mid-game, or how quickly their competition catches up to them. Whatever the case, I hope that when you do share your opinions on this game and its units, you're using your own ideas that you got from your own playthroughs. Casual elitism is a toxic way to talk about these games, and even if you think the rest of my points are garbage, I hope that this one rings true. Thank you for watching.